Hello, and welcome to the Adventures in Arting podcast, where we analyze, explore, and celebrate the creative journey. My name is Julie Fei-Fan Balzer, and I am a working artist living outside of Boston. I've been hosting this podcast with my super special co-host and my mom, Eileen Shoe Balzer, since 2012. Hi, Mom.
Hello.
So I want to let everybody know that my class, Practical Color for Painters, is ongoing. You can jump in anytime. You can find that at balzerdesigns.com. And actually today on Instagram, I posted a photo of some work in progress, and I mentioned that I was working with a desaturated palette, right? And I did have a person who asked me, does desaturated mean adding white? And the answer that I left her was, I said, yes, that's one way to do it. It basically means that you're taking the concentrated color out of it. You're changing the pigment in some way to take out, right, that bright color. And the thing is, you can learn all the ways to desaturate a color, why you would want to, why that matters, why desaturated colors are often considered sophisticated in Practical Color for Painters, because color is a foundational part of art making. It's a wonderful interactive workshop, if I do say so myself, that breaks down all of the complicated ideas into simple and practical lessons. So I hope you'll join me for that. And again, that's at balzerdesigns.com. So this is episode 159, Focus. So this entire episode is inspired by a comment from my YouTube channel. A woman named Lydia Leonard left the following comment. She said, I've been following you for years and always marvel at your genius. See, so already I like her, right? So she said,
My new pen name, Lydia Leonard.
Right? She said, moving walls, so smart. I sort of have the same thing, but I have a hard time putting everything back where it belongs. I've been trying to reorganize, but I get distracted by all the cool things I find. Do you have any focusing ideas to keep me motivated? So right away, I was like, Lydia, I see you. I hear you. I am a fellow magpie. If it is shiny, I am interested. And it doesn't actually have to be shiny, if you know what I mean. Shiny just means if it's interesting, if it's exciting, if it catches my eye. I am the absolute magpie-ist. Magpie? Can that be a phrase that we use? I will switch things like this. I have tried to convince my mother multiple times that I have a disorder, and she says I don't. But anyway, thinking about your magpie issue, I thought I would share something that has really helped me, which is somebody once told me about the idea of like future me. Now, hold on with me while I try to explain this. But the idea here is that this is present me right now in the moment. Future me is the me who wakes up tomorrow or 5 days from now or 5 years from now. So, from like an exercise point of view, it might be like, I don't want to do these sit-ups, but future me will appreciate that I did them, right? So I don't want to finish cleaning this up right now. I've got other stuff to do, but future me will be glad that I did it so that future me can play. So that in fact, you're thinking about it as like giving a gift to yourself in the future. I personally find that really motivating to help me like get back on track when I've sort of magpied off. And so that's really helpful. And I think, so I have a couple other techniques to share with you, and I thought we could share with them, sort of share them in a larger conversation about sort of the general idea about focus. Right? So one of the tenets of my art practice, both the website and my personal art practice, because they're completely interrelated, is consistency. And consistency and focus are also intertwined. So I'm going to get some definitions that I found in the dictionary online, which is focus is a point of concentration. It's directed attention or emphasis. And consistency is conformity in the application of something, typically that which is necessary for the sake of logic, accuracy, or fairness. So for a metaphor, what I would say is consistency is running a steady 6-minute mile during a marathon. This is all theory because I have never done that. But focus is thinking about your breathing, the finish line, how your body is moving, right? Your focus may change throughout the race, but the consistency is the pace at which you are running that race. Again, this is a theoretical conversation about running. But all of that is to say that focus is part of consistency, and consistency requires focus. So we're going to talk sort of all about that and really focus on focus. But we're going to really put our attention onto why focus matters and then some techniques that can help you. Right? Okay, so before I launch into all that I've prepared about this big thought, Mom, I have always felt that you are not a magpie and are often very focused and able to, get to what I would call unpleasant tasks. So, what are the little tips and tricks that you use to get yourself focused?
First, I have a lot of closets. What I'm going to say to you is we're magpies about different things sometimes, but I am a magpie, and this idea of future you is really important to me because I do it in a different way, which leads to me being a magpie. That is, I save things in case. It could be rubber bands, it could be clothes. Uh, and that's a problem because in case never comes. But even if it did, then I should go out and buy more rubber bands,
Mm-hmm.
And uh, my sense is it's easier for me to be ruthless with you and your magpie tendencies than to be that way with my own. Um, I like the idea of, I theoretically like the idea of Marie Kondo and cleaning things out to increase, the quality of my life and be able to focus more. But in fact, I can't do it.
I can't do it either.
One of the things that's happening is I've realized I can do a little baby step. And when I do that, I feel good. So I feel it's the same thing with this tendency to gather things around as if my security comes from having this dress that I can't wear, because I loved it. And not letting my past self dictate the way I'm living in the present. And focus really is improved, in my case at least, by having less stuff around to choose from and to manipulate and to stack and store and tiptoe around. So I'm all with you. And if you can help me focus, that's great.
Well, let's see if we can do it. Okay, so let's talk about first why focus specifically for artists can be helpful. Okay. And by the way, I want to say, so I currently over at my art practice, the book club selection during this cycle is the Rick Rubin book, The Creative Act. And one of the things that he says that I think there's a lot of stuff in there that I think is really useful. But one of the things I really like that he says is he talks about discipline and freedom not being mutually exclusive, that they're like interrelated. They're kind of a yin and a yang. And that is to say that like, if you are disciplined with your time, you're not losing your freedom. Instead, you're building a like fantastic relationship with time, or a harmonious relationship with time. And so I like that idea here too, which is focus and concentration on something is not about somehow like putting yourself on a treadmill and like eliminating things. It's about creating a situation where you can be more creative, more present, all those kinds of things. So that's sort of just a general theory going in. Okay. So in terms of focusing, enhancing creativity, I think one thing we're all kind of looking for is the deeper exploration of ideas, right? Which is that instead of, this is why we do like series or work through an idea multiple times, is that when you're really focused, you can really, you and I had a conversation about this actually yesterday about whether ideas come from your imagination or from external stimulus. And I think that either way, focus allows you to really tune into that, to tune into your imagination, to tune into the leaf you're studying, to tune into whatever it is that is inspiring you, right? Whatever the ideas are that are percolating. I also think, I mean, I know that you enter into a flow state. I often have called you when you're intensely working on a document or something else, and you are just like boom, lost track of time, no idea what's happening. And that happens to me too. And the thing is, I think people sometimes feel like a flow state is a lucky chance, that like the muse struck and you fell into this magical pool of flow state. But I think it's flow state is a thing that you can get yourself into. I mean, after all, like yoga was invented to get people into meditation, which essentially is a version of a flow state, right? And so I think that through small rituals of habits, that's where we get back to consistency, right? You can then find focus, which then gets you into the flow state. So they sort of all lead to each other. I mean, after all, like doing sun salutations, let's say in yoga, like that is a habit, a consistency that you can do. And then you find at the end of it, when you sit down to meditate, like you're in it. Your body has remembered it. And so we can get our things ourselves into an artistic flow state through that kind of stuff, and then have this long focus, which is exciting. Okay, number 2. So improving your skill development. Obviously, consistent practice allows you to make gradual improvements and mastery over time. I still say, and will say until I die, that the biggest difference in my art practice was when I committed to doing art journaling every day. When I committed to doing 10 minutes a day of art journaling, I can see the leaps and bounds that my art made, even though maybe 5 minutes of that 10-minute time period was writing. Just because the consistency of showing up every single day really made such a difference, just in terms of how I was able to jump into the work without lag, how I was able to connect to what I was doing, all that kind of stuff. And I think that, regular focus practice helps in internalizing techniques, developing muscle memory. You don't have to relearn things every time. I think about it a little bit like, when kids go back to school after summer break, and the teachers always say that like they basically have to reteach, pardon me, the previous year. I remember, I'm going to confess this to you, mom, something I've never told you.
Horse.
Great. I know, I'm very excited to tell you.
Probably the only thing you've never
It's
told
probably
me.
the only thing I've never told you, but it's one of the things that stands out in my mind as a deep moment of shame. On the first day of 4th grade, they gave us a long division worksheet. And I knew that I had been taught long division at the end of 3rd grade. I couldn't remember how to do it at all. I couldn't remember anything about it. And I was so embarrassed, and I was so upset that I couldn't figure it out. So I threw it in the trash, and I kept waiting for the teacher or somebody to catch me and to say I didn't turn in my homework, but maybe because it was the first day or whatever, nobody noticed it. I got away with it now for all of these years. But I remember that panicked feeling of being like, somebody taught me this and it just looks like shapes on a page and I don't understand what to do. And I was hideously
So
upset.
what you're saying is every summer you're going to drill your child on his previous skills. I don't know if you remember, your brother went to a camp,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the little boys who was there with him, his mother had taken home all his 1st grade homework and made him redo every single paper that
Yeah.
he had done that year. And I just thought, wow, what a tough summer.
Well, I was going to say, I actually think like culturally, there are some cultures where that is absolutely something that you do. And that guess what happens is in September, your kid hits the ground running. There's no lag, and like, I don't think that we have to be maybe quite that regimented about it, but that is the idea of like, just because school isn't on, you don't stop doing academics. Right.
Well, I want to say that right now, I'm in physical therapy for a variety of things. And the whole idea of physical therapy is incremental small changes and exercises that add up to major improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with you.
Yeah. And you were just complaining the other day that like when you started physical therapy, it was like 10 minutes a day, done. Now he keeps adding
Adding things on. I didn't ask for this.
So now you're up to like half an hour a day, which is actually great. And like, but that's the thing, which is like, I think that's the same is true with an art practice. Like, okay, so it's 10 minutes a day. You can make 10 minutes in your day to do this. And then once you've mastered that, can you get 16 minutes? Can you get 20 minutes? Can you get, and you just keep working it up until you're at a really regular, sustainable practice that you can do. Okay, so sorry, back on track with my list here
All
because,
right.
like a magpie, I've gone off route. Anyway, so in terms of skill development, also thinking about how focus can lead to attention to detail. So for instance, I notice when I'm tired, like late at night when I'm trying to work after my son goes to bed, I am not as good. Like I get frustrated with like little things, or it seems like a lot of work to do the small details, and all that kind of stuff. And I do think that attention to detail can differentiate good art from great art. Like oftentimes we admire things because we look at all those little dots or those tiny cuts or the precision or many of those things that involve having to have focus. Okay, so I also think it's a good idea to think about like what time of day you might have better focus, right? Focus in general increases productivity, right? You can work more efficiently, complete projects faster when you've eliminated distractions. That can lead to more output, less time wasted on non-essential activities. This is otherwise known as put down your phone.
Are
And
you speaking to
also,
me?
I'm sorry, I was looking at you, but I mean, maybe. Anyway, so goal achievement, right? Staying focused helps artists set and achieve your goals more effectively, like all that stuff when you are focused. I also think there's an aspect of personal fulfillment. And what I just mean by that is completing a project feels so good, and especially when you have been focused on it and interested in it, and like you finally get to that point, and like and it feels like your effort has been for something, like that's really exciting and fun, as opposed to kind of, so for instance, there's a piece in my studio that I've been working on. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can probably see because it's hanging behind me. But I've been working on it for a couple weeks, and every day diligently, here, poke, 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 and it's finally feels like it's done, and that is super exciting. That feels really satisfying and good. It makes me feel like all those hours, the pain in my thumb from all the little cutting, like all that stuff was worth it because it's done. So there's a deep satisfaction there. Another thing that I think focus can help with is a higher quality of work, which we talked about a little bit. But it's also just thinking about that. I'm sorry to get back to Rick Rubin again, but because I'm deep in the book, it's on my mind. But one of the things he talks about is he talks about the phase of completion, right? He talks about creative work going through 4 phases. It's like seeding, experimentation, crafting, and then completion. And he talks about how the completion phase is where a lot of people kind of fall apart. Either it could be from fear, like you don't want the project to get done, but it can also be a lack of focus. Like you're just not interested in the project anymore. So you kind of like abandon it and walk away, right? Do you have a lot of sort of half finished artwork sitting around? How many, in quilting, we call it a UFO, an unfinished object. How many UFOs do you have stuffed in a drawer? I've got a lot. How many paper projects are kind of halfway done and it was too much? So if you can focus, right, then you can get through that finishing phase, which is often the phase that requires like the refining and the polishing and all those kind of small things that really make a big difference to the quality of the work. Or it's that thing where the work isn't quite there, but if you could push it a little bit more, it would get finished. And that takes a lot of effort and you need the focus to do it. These are all the things that kind of stop us from completing work. And I think that again, that can be disheartening because then you sort of feel bad that you've got all these unfinished projects, but you don't know how to deal with them. So focus, 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 focus. High quality work, as I wrote here, high quality work born from a focused practice is more likely to gain recognition and appreciation from peers and critics, and that can all lead to more opportunities. And I would say I tend to be a binger when it comes to working. So I will have periods of high focus. I have a consistent art practice, but my focus tends to kind of wander through that, like weave through that. And I find that in the moments when I'm most intensely focused and most intensely like making, it's really exciting, and it's really like an adrenaline rush, and it's really fulfilling and all that kind of stuff. But it also requires fuel, and that's kind of the secondary. You can't stay in that high forever. So I actually think that focus is something for me that is short duration. And that short duration could be like a week as opposed to like 6 months. But it's kind of like in business, they talk about high performing teams and can you work at your absolute best all out, like for what period of time. There are companies I know that work on like a 6 week cycle. Everybody go, go, go. And then they have like a week where everybody kind of has a lull, you know, and that those are the weeks where it's like, take a vacation, you know, work from home, like whatever. And then you come back and you hit it hard for 6 weeks. And I think that there are many different iterations of that where people have tried, because I think, you know, when they talk about like interval training, that's the same idea again. So you can't run a marathon flat out at your fastest speed. There's just no way, right? You have to have some sort of consistency so that you can have the endurance of the long race. And so I think that focus to me is like the last mile where you're just like put on the gas, you know, and consistency is what sort of carries you through it. I don't know, Mom, does this all make sense to you?
It does, but I want to say the following,
Mm-hmm.
which is as I've grown older, I have, and I now have the time and leisure without having little annoying children around. Uh, I find that I am more in tune with my brain. That is to say, I'm more aware of what are good times of day. This gets back to your thing about certain times and when I am most productive. And it has changed over time. I used to be a night owl and I would be writing madly till 2 or 3 in the morning or something like that. That's harder for me now. You know, I can't do Wordle really well. That New York Times crossword, or not crossword, but
Word game.
word
Mm-hmm.
puzzle at 3 in the morning. Whereas in the daytime, I sometimes come back to one that I've unsuccessfully tried last night, and it's so obvious to me, I don't even know why I didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think getting to know your biorhythms, which may change over time, getting to know when you are at your most productive and not trying to force it into some other time zone is important for focus.
Yeah.
So I think another, it's just like knowing your schedule and knowing when you're most likely to be interrupted by people. Then why frustrate yourself by trying to, you know, why frustrate yourself trying to do things at the very exact moment when your child is returning from school and
Mm-hmm.
wants some attention? It isn't going to happen. You'll be upset, he'll be upset, and the thing won't get done. So I think there is some element of trying to figure out your own biorhythms and schedule so that it has a chance of working.
I agree. This is again about like knowing yourself. If I had like one piece of advice for artists about making art, it would be know yourself, know what you like, know how you behave, like that you are the best barometer of how every decision should be made, you know? And I think that that holds true here too. So let's talk about some practical tips for creating focus. So some of them we've been over, but let's just hit my list because I wrote it up and, you know, why not? Which is setting clear goals, right? So defining what you want to achieve in each session and making it a small, manageable task, right? That can help you focus. So for instance, I am reading a book right now and I have set out for myself at the end of each chapter, I get up and go do something, get a glass of water. Do you know what I mean? Go to the bathroom, look at my phone. Like it doesn't matter, but it's just I have a goal, finish this chapter, you know, and then I know what's going to happen. And then I come back to the book. And that's the way I'm working through this very dense, you know, book. But I think you can do it with all kinds of things. And this is, again, was always my 10 minutes a day of art journaling. I knew that I would set a timer. That was my goal. 10 minutes, open the journal, do something. But the only goal was to make it to 10 minutes. So I think you can find ways to do it, and then you can focus for that period of time. This is also sort of the theory behind the Pomodoro technique, which a lot of people use, which is the idea of like you work for 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break. It's just like, again, like a very regulated way of working. The second thing, which I've talked about a lot, particularly around Carve December and some other projects that require focus, like a 100-day project or anything like that, is to create a dedicated workspace. And if you can't create a dedicated workspace, then to create like a kit, a bucket, a tray, a bin, a something, so that it's organized, it's somewhat distraction free. You don't have to spend time worrying about like, where is this? How do I set this up? You just grab the bin and go. And one example of this is like, I think it's Einstein who wore the same suit every single day so that he just didn't have to think about dressing. And I think there are other people through history who have done similar things where you just don't want to have one more thing to add to your agenda of decisions to make. I know that I reach decision fatigue a lot. And I will often say, like, I just need somebody else to pick where to go to dinner. Just tell me, just, order something and leave me alone. Like, I need to not have to make any more decisions today. And so if you can save your decisions for actually being creative, I think that's really helpful. And so setting up a space, a tray, a bin, a shoebox, something is really, really helpful. Establishing a routine. So this is regular hours for your art practice and stick to them. Developing rituals that signal the start and the end of your creative time. Very early on in book club, I didn't make fun of. I said it was not for me, there's an excellent watercolor book by, I think it's Katarina Ewing. Anyway, and I was part of book club. You can find it on YouTube. She talks about like these rituals that she does before she starts to watercolor, and it was a little bit kumbaya for me. So great for her, love it for her, not for me. And so I had trouble with that. So for me, like the ritual that I have does not involve like lighting incense or a candle or like thinking of something or saying a small meditation, which for many people I think can be wonderful. But for me, it's like, I know I'm in work mode when I come up the stairs to my studio. I flip on the studio lights. I go straight to my computer. I sit down and I check my email. And that is like, it's not a great ritual, but it's the way that every work day begins for me. And then I know, that I'm switching into like art mode when I put I get the apron from off the, hanging thing, and I put it on and I try it up and I look at what's on the wall from yesterday. And then I'm in art mode. And I think a ritual can be that small. Who are the monks that like ring the bells, and they ring a bell and like it changes the tone of what they're doing? Or like if you come out of a meditation, sometimes the yoga teacher will ring a bell or a gong or something, because then again, that like changes the mood of what's happening. And that is kind of a ritual. So the ritual can be very long and big, or I think it can be very short and practical, but it's something that you do that immediately says like, here I am entering into this practice.
I think if you watch anything, any contest, any athletic event, whatever, they have those little rituals that they do that become part of the event. I mean, gentlemen, start your engines, or Kentucky Derby, they sing a certain song, or I just think that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And in a funny way, so when you go to a restaurant that offers you an amuse-bouche, which is like a little thing that you didn't order, it's a little extra from the chef, that's a way of setting the tone. It's a ritual that
Mm-hmm.
now we're going to have this lovely food, and it's partly a relationship between you and the chef.
Mm-hmm.
Puts you in a different mind. So yes, I'm into that. Although I have to say, anything that begins with light a candle doesn't work for me because all I do is think about the candle and
Right,
is it
I'm
out
worried
now?
that it's gonna burn down the house, and
Is
even
it
after
going
it's
to
out,
catch
I'm putting it in the
fire?
sink,
Yeah.
I'm checking it 50 times. I cannot have candles in the house without being hysterical about them, but that's a whole other, issue. What I was gonna say is too is I think sometimes that there is, again, like, ritual is just another word for consistency. This is when you go to a church in any country, like a Catholic church in any country, you probably can understand what's going on because there's a ritual to the service, right? When I go to somebody else's house for like Passover, there's a ritual, and so I understand like exactly how it's going to be. So it's a consistency. Okay, so limiting digital distractions, and I am looking at you this time. So this is during whatever time it is that you want to focus, turn off notifications on your devices, use apps that block you out from things, set specific times to do things. Something I've been trying really hard to do is to not use TikTok. I have found that it was a total time suck for me, that I could spend an hour or more a day on it and not even realize it. And so I kicked it off my phone, and I've been trying really hard not to like reinstall it or to think about it. Occasionally my husband will show me a TikTok that he's watching, but it just felt like it was too addictive and I was wasting too much time doing it. And I will also say that the one small mercy is I don't think that my customers are on TikTok in that way. So I think that it's fine for me to not be there. Whereas no matter how much I might like to, I do feel like I have an obligation to be on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube where I do think my customer is. So, but that's a separate issue. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, TikTok, I don't even have the app on my phone.
mhm.
Uh, and one of the things is if I find that, for example, I'll watch TV because I have a few minutes here. If I find I'm searching around in the channels for something to watch, but there's nothing in particular, I now have trained myself to just turn it off and do something else because searching around just means there's no reason to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you can use focus techniques. So there's all sorts of mindfulness and meditation things that you can do if that's your flavor. The Pomodoro technique that I was talking about is another one. If you're taking notes, you can use sketchnoting. If you Google for focus techniques, you'll find tons and tons and tons of ways. Personally, I like the future me idea. I also like a time limit. I find that is a hard finite goal to hit, so I can say like I'm going to do this for 20 minutes, I'm going to do this for 10 minutes, I'm going to do this for 15 minutes, and I can always do another 15 minutes if I feel like it, but if I don't, then it's done. I know there are some writers who are like, I'm going to finish a page. I find it very hard to do goals that involve things like I'm going to finish this artwork, I'm going
Yeah.
to, work until this is good or something like those are harder targets to hit because you just never know. And I think it gets in my head too much. Do you know what I mean about it? So I really prefer time based goals. Sometimes I do a thing that, again, some people gave me advice about that I absolutely love, which I will now pass on to you.
Oh,
Which
thank you.
is if my studio is a mess, instead of saying I'm going to clean everything top to bottom and make it perfect, which is like a huge task, I'll say I'm going to put on a podcast for 15 minutes and whatever I can get done in that 15 minutes. And oftentimes I'll be like in the flow of cleaning. So I'll just keep going, or I'm really enjoying the podcast. So I'll just keep going. But if not, I'll just let it go, and keep moving on. And what I would say to Lydia, who started this whole conversation because she was having trouble putting things away, I would say again, like, I don't think you need to put everything away right away. That's my own personal philosophy. Some people would be very upset and need to put everything away right away. But for me, what you need to do is not end up in a situation where you're drowning in stuff, don't have anywhere to work, can't find it. And you need to be able to find those pockets and minutes of time when you can focus in a short burst, not thinking of it as focusing for hours. They say that each of us really only has like 1 to 2 hours a day of truly focused time that we can give. Everything else is slightly distracted. So you should think about that, and what is really worth your time. Okay, setting
I like that.
boundaries.
Because
You
what
like
I do is
Mhm.
I'll clean one drawer or one
Mm.
surface or one box, and it's plenty, but I feel good afterward. I feel
Mhm.
successful.
There was a fad a couple of years ago. I say a couple because now I'm an old person. It was probably 20 years ago. Um, that of this throw one thing away every day. And there was a woman who took some quilting classes from me, and she had an Instagram account that was dedicated to, she would just take a picture of whatever it is she was throwing away that day. And she said, it's amazing. So the first few days she was like, are easy, even the first few weeks, because you've got stuff that you need to throw away, right? But she said, then it gets hard. But then you start to like, she said, suddenly you're like, I don't need this book. I don't need this book. Oh, now I've got 100 books, 100 days of things to throw away. Do I need to keep this knickknack? Do I need to keep that? And the first few are tough. And then after that, you're just kind of like, let all the knickknacks go. And so I think, like, again, all these things are small things can turn out to make a huge difference. 1,000 grains of sand, as they say.
Does cleaning out your vegetable drawer by throwing out one bunch of scallions, does that count as one thing?
I say yes. I'm going to count that. So setting boundaries. This is communicating with your family or friends about your need for uninterrupted time. So for instance, I said to my husband, reminder, I am recording a podcast at 4:30 today. Please do not interrupt me. And he said, gotcha. The same thing is true of like lots of other versions of some people do it as like, I need to take a class. I'm taking a class. Don't interrupt me. This is an appointment that I'm making. You did that for a long time with an exercise class that you took.
Right.
And I have found that has been useful for me because I feel a lot of guilt if I announce to my son and my child, I need some
Are they
time.
not the same person?
My son and my child. I just said that. If mentally, I was thinking of my husband and my child. That's a Freudian slip if I ever heard one. Sometimes I feel bad if I say to my husband and my child, I just want to go and work in my studio and I don't want to, do whatever it is that we're doing here. So I have found that, one of the boundaries that I can set then is like to have a class or to have something else that I'm doing where I have to go. And it's in a way to say, there you go. I
You
need
have
to.
a physically separate place, the studio.
Mhm.
Although it's in your house, you have to climb an extra flight of stairs to get there, which is very handy. I think it's much more difficult for people who don't have a hideout to
Mhm.
go to. I mean,
100%.
I think
And
your brother
nonetheless,
has that issue now
mhm,
because they're building an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, in order
mhm,
to have more room, and he plans to use it as his study slash guest room escape.
mhm,
And I
mhm.
think it's very hard when you don't have that literal physical space, with a door or something that you can
I
close.
agree. I have no door, but it is a literal physical separate space. Although little feet do suddenly come up here, as witnessed on. I think there's at least one podcast where a little boy interrupted it. But
Some
yeah, and
people use
also,
commuting, by the way. They use commuting as a place, as a
yeah,
safe place to escape to.
absolutely. And I think like you just have to find that thing. Like, do you need to get out of the house? Do you need to go to a coffee shop, a library, a class, or whatever, just to get out and set that boundary if you can't, find that work time elsewhere. And this is a lot of the reasons that people don't have studio space outside their house, whether it's in a shared studio or a solo studio, is just because they need to say, like, I am at work, leave me alone. I am doing something important, right? And then the last thing that I just said in terms of focus, and this is going to sound kind of silly, and it might be about the season that I'm in with my life, but like, you gotta take care of yourself, like get enough sleep, manage your stress. You cannot focus if you're constantly, it's like you and I are talking about the candle all the time. So imagine like you're worried about other things in your life. You're concerned about what's happening somewhere else. You have a health issue. All those things make it really hard to focus. If you're grieving, I actually have found that art has helped me find focus in times that I've had a lot of mental stress or anguish going on, and art journaling has certainly been something that was great for me during that time period. But I do think that however you do it, you kind of need to take care of yourself along the way to help you with that. Now,
Art journaling,
Mhm.
it goes to the whole diary thing, only maybe you're doing it visually
Mhm.
or talking to someone else, or I just feel like uh, isolation is an enemy
I
often
agree. Community,
to
community.
getting past things. Yeah.
Mhm. So a little bit to play devil's advocate, although it's not completely counter to what we've been talking about. Uh I feel like Rick Rubin has come up a lot in this, and it's again, sorry, I'm just reading the book. It's for book club over at my art practice, and I can't stop talking about the book because I like it so much. Anyway, one of the things that he talks about is the difference between distraction and procrastination when we're talking about focus, and that distraction is actually useful and procrastination is not. Procrastination is an avoidance, but distraction is like you can't figure something out, you're working something through, so you go for a walk. And in that sort of half state of being aware of the problem and not, in the middle of your walk, your nature walk, you're like, oh, I got it. It's the idea of distraction is that like you're doing something else and this other thing is sort of like percolating through you, but it's still there, as opposed to procrastination, where like when I'm on TikTok or even Pinterest or something, like I'm not really thinking about whatever problem it is that I'm trying to work through. I'm procrastinating, right?
Although I think
I'm
a
trying
lot of
to use.
times the difference between the two
Mhm.
is the out, because one can look very much like the other. Again, I think it depends on the way your mind works.
I think that's true. I think that for me, I noticed that like, so Steve, I've never understood this. Like he can do homework and all sorts of stuff with the TV going in his office. And like he says it's easier for him when he just has like that background noise. It helps him to focus. And for me, if I have the TV on, I am watching the TV. Like I cannot redirect. I think it's one of the reasons that podcasts have been such a good thing for me because I do. And by the way, I can't write when I'm listening to a podcast. I can't read when I'm
No,
podcast.
I
I
can't
I,
either.
I can only do what I would call like either that are like purely visual tasks, like drawing something or painting something. And even then, I think that some of my decisions get colored by what I'm listening to.
Although interestingly, you've always been a person who doodles while you're on the phone.
True. True, true. Because I do think that there is that idea of distraction for me helps me focus on certain things. Like I actually hear the podcast better because of the art. I'm not sure if I make the art better because of the podcast. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it
Yes,
clearly
but
helps me focus on what I'm hearing.
what's always been true is that when you look at some art, if you were listening to a podcast while you worked on it, you actually remember
Oh yeah.
what podcast
Oh
you
yeah.
were listening to.
I have to say, the piece that's behind me right now, I listen to a lot of this podcast called Morbid, which is a podcast about serial killers. So like it's funny because it's a very like jubilant feeling piece, but but every time I look at it, I'm thinking of like, oh yeah, that serial killer. Oh yeah, that other serial killer story. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. So I hope what you got out of this podcast and the conversation between mom and me is like you understand a little bit more about like why focus and consistency are so important to a practice, a couple techniques that you can use to try to find that in your own art practice. And also, you should read The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. So many people have been talking about it, and I honestly have ignored it for the last few months because I've been like, oh, it's just one of these things that everybody talks about. It's I think it's really good. I've really enjoyed it. I don't think like everything he says is, manna from heaven, but like there's a lot in it that's super thought provoking and really exciting. So I recommend that. Okay. And if you want to develop a strong and thriving art practice, I hope you'll check out myartpractice.com. You can get on the wait list and be the first to know when the doors open on August 8th for cycle 2. And the focus of cycle 2 is going to be on iteration or working in a series. So I'm super excited about that. Mom, any last thoughts before we sign off?
You've got me thinking about throwing things out now.
I'm excited to see what that entails. Could be a
You're saying this, but
dumpster.
you're the person who has Barbies and American Girl and all this stuff, strawberry shortcake, still stored at my house. So I'm
But
just
does my
saying.
son like them and play with them? Yes. So you save them for 40 years, 30 years. Anyway, you save them for a long time, for decades, and it's all worth it now. Okay, so if you want to connect and tell me about your trash, you can do that. You can find me at juliebalzer.com or all over social media as @Balzer Designs. I hope you'll sign up for the free weekly newsletter that comes out on Fridays. That's the best way to make sure you keep up on the latest news. There's a big button on the homepage of juliebalzer.com where you can do that, or you can go to the show page for this podcast to find the link. If you'd like to help the show, you can leave a review, mention us on social media, or tell a friend. All of those things help other people find the show. So thank you so much for listening and subscribing. We'll see you the next time on the Adventures in Arting podcast.